"You're a liability," he said, not even looking at her in the eye. "I don't need you anymore." Rita stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. "James, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. We can still fix things." But James didn't care. His decision had been made, and there was no going back. He threw her out of the house that night, sending her away with nothing but the clothes on her back. James and Rita had known each other for 4 years. They met in Accra, where both were building their lives. James worked as a business manager for a local company, while Rita was a teacher at a primary school. Their love grew slowly, built on trust, kindness, and mutual support. Friends admired their relationship, always calling them the perfect couple. James was the kind of man who believed in hard work. He wasn't rich when they met, but he was determined to build a future. Rita, with her calm and understanding nature, supported him through every challenge. She was there when his business plans failed, and she cheered him on when he got a promotion. Together they were a team, and their bond grew stronger with every passing year. Rita loved how thoughtful James was. He would remember the smallest details about her, like how she loved roses or how she couldn't sleep without reading a book before bed. She always felt cherished by him, and in return, she gave him all her love. After 4 years of dating, James knew it was time to take the next step. He had been planning his proposal for months, wanting it to be a moment Rita would never forget. He had picked out the perfect ring and decided that the night had to be just right. One evening, James took Rita out to a quiet restaurant. It was one of their favorite spots where they often went to escape the noise of the city. As they sat across from each other, James seemed a little nervous, but Rita didn't notice. She was busy enjoying the breeze and the twinkling of lights. After dinner, as they walked hand in hand along the street, James suddenly stopped. Rita turned to him, wondering why he had become so quiet. Before she could ask, he pulled out a small box from his pocket, got down on one knee, and looked up at her with love in his eyes. "Rita," he said softly, his voice trembling slightly, "these 4 years with you have been the best of my life. I can't imagine a future without you. Will you marry me?" Rita's heart skipped a beat. She had always dreamt of this moment, but seeing it happen felt surreal. Her eyes filled with tears of happiness as she looked down at the man she loved, the man who had been her partner through everything. She didn't hesitate for a second. "Yes, James," she exclaimed, her voice full of joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." James stood up, slipping the ring onto her finger as they hugged tightly, both of them overwhelmed with happiness. They stayed like that for a moment, just holding each other, knowing that their lives were about to change forever. In the days that followed, excitement filled the air as they began planning their wedding. Rita had always dreamt of a simple but beautiful ceremony, surrounded by family and friends. James, however, wanted to go the extra mile. He wanted everything to be perfect, just like she deserved. One evening, as they sat in their living room discussing the wedding details, James smiled at her. "I've been thinking, babe," he said casually, trying to hide the surprise he had planned. "How would you feel about doing your wedding shopping in Nigeria?" Rita's eyes lit up. "Nigeria?" she asked, surprised. "You know I've always wanted to visit. But James, we can't afford that right now, at least not at the moment." James laughed softly and shook his head. "Don't worry about the cost," he said, taking her hand. "I want you to have the best experience. We will take care of everything else when you get back. This is my gift to you." Rita was speechless. She had always dreamt of visiting Nigeria, and now, not only would she be going, but she would be shopping for her wedding. It felt like a dream come true for her. And so the plans were set. Rita and her best friend Sarah would travel to Nigeria for 2 weeks. It would be a time for them to shop, explore, and enjoy the experience. James wanted nothing more than to see Rita happy, and he knew this trip would be the perfect way to start the next chapter of their lives together. Rita and Sarah could barely contain their excitement as they boarded the plane to Nigeria. It was their first time traveling outside of Ghana, and everything felt like a new adventure. Rita, who had never been on a plane before, couldn't help but feel a mix of nervousness and excitement. Sarah, on the other hand, was bubbling with joy, constantly pointing out different things as they settled into their seats. Can you believe this? Sarah asked, her voice filled with wonder. We are actually flying to Nigeria. Rita smiled and nodded, still in disbelief that this was really happening. I know, it feels so much like a dream. I can't wait to see everything. The flight was smooth, and as they looked out of the window, they marveled at the clouds beneath them. The excitement of visiting a new country and shopping for their wedding made Rita's heart race with joy. She couldn't wait to experience all that Nigeria had to offer. When they landed in Lagos, the bustling energy of the city hit them immediately. The airport was crowded with people, the air warm and filled with the sounds of voices and car horns. Rita and Sarah, wide-eyed and eager, quickly made their way through the busy terminal, soaking in the vibrant atmosphere around them. Their first stop was the hotel James had booked for them. It was a modest but comfortable place, with clean rooms and friendly staff. As they unpacked their bags, Sarah turned to Rita, grinning from ear to ear. This is going to be amazing, she said. We have 2 whole weeks to explore, shop, and just have fun. Rita nodded, feeling the same excitement. I can't believe James did all of this. He's really making his wedding special. Over the next few days, the two friends dived into their adventure. Lagos was a city unlike any they have seen. The streets were alive with activity, cars honking, vendors selling all kinds of goods, and people moving in every direction. The markets, in particular, were a sight to behold. They were crowded, loud, and full of color, with stores selling everything from fresh fruits to beautiful fabrics. Rita and Sarah spent hours walking through the market, searching for the perfect items for the wedding. They visited boutiques, trying on different wedding dresses, each one more beautiful than the last. Rita couldn't believe how many options there were, from traditional Nigerian styles to more modern gowns. It felt like a dream, trying on dresses after dresses. One afternoon, as they entered a small boutique, Rita spotted a dress that took her breath away. It was a simple but elegant gown with delicate lace detailing and a flowing skirt that seemed to shimmer in the light. This is the one, Rita whispered to Sarah, her eyes wide with awe. Sarah grinned and nodded. You're going to look stunning in that. Rita tried on the dress, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she could hardly recognize the woman staring back at her. She felt like a bride, like everything was finally coming together. She quickly snapped a picture and sent it to James with a message. Thank you for making my dream come true. The days flew by as they continued to shop for the wedding. They found the perfect flowers, bright and colorful, just the way Rita had imagined. They picked out James's suit, a sleek black design that would make him look as handsome as ever. And of course, they spent time just enjoying the city, exploring different neighborhoods, tasting the local food, and even visiting a few tourist spots. Rita couldn't stop smiling. Every moment in Nigeria felt magical, and she was grateful to have Sarah by her side. Together, they laughed, explored, and made memories that would last a lifetime. As their 2 weeks in Lagos came to an end, Rita felt a bittersweet sense of happiness. She was excited to return to Ghana and prepare for the wedding, but she also knew she would miss the vibrant energy of Nigeria. The trip had been everything she dreamed of and more. On the flight back home, Rita couldn't stop thinking about the wedding. Everything was finally in place: the dress, the flowers, James's outfit, the decorations. In just 1 month, she would be walking down the aisle, marrying the man she loved. It felt surreal and yet so perfect. As they touched down in Ghana, Rita looked over at Sarah and smiled. We did it, she said softly. Everything is ready. Sarah grinned back. Now, all that's left is to enjoy the wedding and start the next chapter of your life. Rita nodded, her heart full of anticipation for the future. Everything was set, and just in a few short weeks, her dream would become a reality. The day of the wedding had finally arrived, and there was an air of excitement buzzing all around. Rita had woken up early that morning, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy and nervousness. It felt sorry to her. The day she had dreamt of for so long was here. She could hardly believe she was about to become James's wife. In the hours leading up to the ceremony, the house was filled with laughter and chatter as family and friends helped her get ready. Sarah was by her side, helping with her dress and making sure everything was perfect. You look stunning, Rita, Sarah said with a smile, stepping back to admire her friend. James won't be able to take his eyes off you. Rita smiled, her heart swelling with love and excitement. She took a deep breath and looked at herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman in the beautiful lace gown, her hair styled perfectly and her makeup soft and elegant. She felt like a bride, and more importantly, she felt ready. Outside, the venue was beautifully decorated with flowers and ribbons, just as they had planned. Friends and family from all over had gathered to witness their union. The atmosphere was filled with joy, and the sound of soft music played in the background. As James stood in front of the altar, dressed in his black sleek suit, his heart racing as he waited for Rita to appear. He hadn't seen her all day, and the anticipation was almost too much to bear. When the music changed and Rita appeared at the entrance, James couldn't believe his eyes. She was breathtaking, and in that moment, everything else faded away. As she walked down the aisle, their eyes locked and they exchanged a smile that said everything. They were ready to spend the rest of their lives together. The ceremony was simple yet beautiful. They exchanged heartfelt vows, promising to love and support each other through all of life's ups and downs. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd as they said their I do's and sealed their promises with a kiss. When the night came to an end from the celebrations, they left the reception hand in hand, ready to start their honeymoon and the next chapter of their lives, and everything felt so perfect. After the honeymoon, life settled into a comfortable rhythm for James and Rita. Their love continued to blossom, and they embraced their new roles as husband and wife. They were happy, really happy. They built a life together, filling their homes with laughter, warmth, and memories. As time passed, something began to weigh on their hearts. 2 years into their marriage, despite their hopes and efforts, they had not been able to have children. At first, neither of them was too concerned. They believed it would happen when the time was right, but as the months turned into years, the absence of a child began to feel more pronounced. Rita, though worried, remained hopeful. She prayed and kept her faith, believing that one day they would have a child of their own. James, too, tried to remain optimistic, but he could sense the growing pressure around them, particularly from his mother. James's mother had always been traditional, and to her, marriage without children seemed incomplete. She loved her son deeply and had high hopes for him to marry on the family name. As the months went by, her subtle comments turned into direct conversations, and soon her frustration became clear. One afternoon, during a family gathering, James's mother pulled him aside, her voice low but firm. "James," she began, her face tight with concern, "you are not getting any younger. I am not getting any younger. What's happening? Why haven't you had children yet?" James sighed, feeling the weight of her words. "Mom, it's not something we can control. We are trying. It will happen when it happens." But his mother wasn't satisfied with that answer. "Trying isn't enough," she said, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "I want to see my grandchild before I leave this world. What is the point of a marriage if there are no children?" These words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Though she hadn't meant to, James' mother had spoken words that stung. Rita, who had overheard these conversations from the next room, felt a sharp pain in her chest. She had been doing everything she could, praying, hoping, staying positive, but hearing those words made her feel like a failure. That night, as they lay in bed, James tried to comfort her. "Don't listen to her, Rita," he whispered, his arms wrapped around her. "We will have our time." I believe that. But no matter how many times James reassured her, the doubt and fear began to creep into Rita's heart. The pressure from his mother was constant and it weighed heavily on her, making her wonder if something was wrong with her. As much as she tried to brush it off, each comment, each passing month without a child made her feel more and more isolated. It was a quiet afternoon when James visited his mother. He often came by to check on her and make sure she was doing well. But this time, there was an air of tension between them, something unspoken hanging in the room. His mother had been unusually quiet during the visit, her eyes occasionally flickering towards James as if she was waiting for the right moment to speak. Eventually, she sighed heavily and looked him straight in the eyes. "James," she said in a low, serious tone, "we need to talk." James sat up, sensing that this wasn't just another casual conversation. "What is on your mind, Mom?" he asked. His mother hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words, but then she spoke with a cold, blunt tone. "It's been 2 years, 2 whole years, and still no child. I am not getting any younger, and neither are you. Do you really plan to live your life without children?" James frowned, his heart sinking slightly. He had heard this before, his mother's constant reminders about the absence of grandchildren. He loved his mother, but these conversations were beginning to wear on him. "Mom, I've told you we are trying." "Rita and I, trying isn't enough," his mother interrupted, her voice sharp. "If Rita can't give you a child, maybe it's time to find someone who can." James froze, the weight of her words hitting him like a punch in the gut. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His mother leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "I want my grandchild, James. Don't let this woman's barrenness keep you from having a family. You are my only child. If something happens to you, the family name dies with you. Is that what you want?" James sat there, speechless. He had never considered leaving Rita, not for once. He loved her deeply, and the thought of betraying her felt wrong. But his mother's words lingered, echoing in his mind. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. "I love Rita, Mom. We will have a child when the time is right." His mother sighed, clearly frustrated. "Love is important, but so is legacy, James. You have to think about the future. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment." James left his mother's house that day, feeling conflicted. He tried to push her suggestions aside, convincing himself that their time would come. But as the days turned into weeks, and weeks into more months, his mother's words began to take root. He couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she was right. But what if they never had children? What if he never became a father? It was a slow creeping process, one that ate away at him little by little. He loved Rita, but the pressure from his mother and the constant reminder of their childless marriage weighed heavily on him. He began to feel the strain on his relationship, the unspoken tension between him and Rita growing with each passing day. It was during one of these business trips that things started to change. James met Emma, a young woman who worked at the company he was partnering with. Emma was everything Rita wasn't: carefree, flirtatious, and most importantly, unburdened by the struggles of trying to conceive. She was kind to James, always making him feel good about himself, something he had been missing as the tension at home grew. At first, it was just casual conversation. They met for coffee, discussed work, and occasionally laughed about random things. But over time, their meetings became more frequent, more intimate. James found himself drawn to her, and soon enough, their relationship crossed a line that he couldn't take back. It wasn't long before James began to see Emma regularly. His actions were slow, almost calculated, as he balanced his secret life with Emma and his marriage to Rita. He justified his behavior by telling himself that he was only doing what was necessary. His mother wanted a grandchild, and Emma seemed like the solution to his problems. But Rita wasn't oblivious. She noticed the late nights, the distant looks, and the way James had become emotionally unavailable. At first, she tried to brush it off, telling herself that he was just busy with work. But as time went on, the signs became impossible to ignore. Something was wrong, and deep down, she knew what it was. One evening, when James came home unusually late, Rita confronted him. She couldn't hold back her anger. "James," she said, her voice trembling, "what's going on? You've been distant, so cold. Are you seeing someone else?" James, caught off guard by her directness, hesitated for a moment before responding. "Rita, don't be ridiculous. I've just been busy with work." But Rita wasn't convinced. Tears welled up in her eyes as she pressed further. "Don't lie to me, James. I can feel it. Something is not right. Please tell me the truth." James, unable to look her in the eye, felt a wave of guilt wash over him. But instead of confessing, he let his frustration take control. "I need a child, Rita," he snapped, his voice harsh. "I am not getting any younger, and neither are you. We've been trying for 2 years, and nothing. What am I supposed to do?" Rita's heart shattered at his words. "We promised to love each other through everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How could you do this to me? I've given you everything." But James, blinded by his desire for a child and the pressure from his mother, brushed her words aside. "I'm doing what I have to do," he said coldly. "This isn't just about us. I have responsibilities." Rita stood there, speechless, as James walked away from her, leaving her alone in the living room with her shattered heart. She had never felt so betrayed, so utterly broken. The man she had promised to love and cherish had chosen someone else, a woman who could give him what she apparently couldn't. Emma's pregnancy marked a turning point in James's life. The moment she figured it, James' mother, who had been anxiously waiting for the news of a grandchild, was overjoyed. She had wanted this for so long, and now that it was happening, there was no doubt in her mind about what needed to be done. "You must marry her," his mother insisted, her voice filled with authority. "I cannot have my grandchild born out of wedlock. What would people say?" James, already feeling the pressure from his mother, didn't take too long to agree. After all, Emma was now carrying his child, something Rita had failed to do. Without much thought about the consequences or the pain it would cause, he decided to marry Emma. It all happened quickly, without any care for the broken pieces of his first marriage that still lay scattered. Rita, devastated by the news, felt like her world had completely crumbled. She knew what was happening, but couldn't believe it was real. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Her husband, the man she had loved and trusted, was now marrying another woman. But despite the humiliation and the heartbreak, she couldn't bring herself to leave. The thought of the stigma of being a woman thrown out of her husband's house weighed heavily on her. In their society, living meant a lifetime of whispers, judgment, and scorn from people who barely knew her story. The worst part of it all was that James had completely changed. He no longer treated her with the kindness or love she had once known. Instead, he became cruel. The more Rita tried to confront him, hoping to salvage something from their shattered relationship, the worse he treated her. One evening, after she gathered the courage to ask why he had betrayed her, James snapped. His face contorted with anger, and without warning, he hit her for the first time. "You are barren," he shouted, his voice filled with contempt. "You are useless." Rita stood there, stunned, her face burning from the slap, but the pain from his words hurt far deeper than the physical blow. From that moment on, the abuse only intensified. James had crossed the line, and he didn't hold back. His insults became more frequent, his temper more violent, and it wasn't just him. His mother and Emma joined in the abuse as well, their cruelty knowing no bounds. They taunted her, called her names, and belittled her for her inability to bear children. Emma, now smug and confident in her position as James's second wife, looks down on Rita every chance she got. She made sure to remind Rita of her supposed failure. Rita, already broken, endured the insults and the beatings, feeling trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Every day in that house felt like a new form of torture. When Emma finally gave birth to a healthy baby boy, the house was filled with celebrations. James' mother couldn't stop smiling, holding her newborn grandson with pride and joy. They named him Michael, and from that moment he arrived, he became the center of attention. Rita watched from the shadows, invisible in her own home. While everyone else celebrated, she was left with nothing but her pain. She felt like an outsider in the life she had once been part of. Michael's birth solidified her place as the barren wife, the one who had failed to give James the child his mother had demanded. At first, Rita tried to be part of Michael's life. Despite everything, she loved children and the baby's innocence tugged at her heart. One afternoon, she cautiously reached out to hold him, hoping to feel some semblance of warmth or love in her cold world. But Emma, ever watchful, quickly swooped in. "Don't touch him," she snapped, snatching the baby from Rita's arms. "Go and have your own child." The words hit Rita like a slap to the face, and for a moment she stood frozen in shock. James and his mother, sitting nearby, did nothing to stop Emma. In fact, they laughed, amused by the cruelty. Rita's hands trembled as she pulled back, her heart breaking all over again. She was never allowed to hold Michael after that. Each time she tried, Emma or James's mother would sneer at her, making sure she understood that she didn't belong in the family anymore. Rita's days were spent in silence, enduring the daily humiliation and cruelty from the people she once called a family. She had nowhere to go, nowhere to turn to. All she had was the weight of her broken dreams and the painful reminder of the life she had lost. As time went on, James's disdain for Rita grew. He saw no value in her anymore. In his eyes, she was a burden, a shadow of the woman he had once loved. The new family he had built with Emma and their son was all he cared about. Rita was just a painful reminder of the failure he had believed she represented. It wasn't long before James decided to take the final step. One evening, without any warning, he announced that he had filed for a divorce. The coldness in his voice sent chills down Rita's spine. "You're a liability," he said, not even looking at her in the eye. "I don't need you anymore." Rita stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. After everything they had been through, after all the sacrifices she had made, he was throwing her out of the house like she meant nothing. She had given her life to this marriage, endured the abuse, the betrayal, the humiliation, and now he was telling her she was no longer needed. "James, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. We can still fix things." But James didn't care. His decision had been made, and there was no going back. The papers were signed, and Rita was left with no choice but to leave. He threw her out of the house that night, sending her away with nothing but the clothes on her back. Rita wandered the streets, her heart shattered into pieces. She had no family to turn to, no place to call home. Everything she had known, everything she had built was gone. James had stripped her of everything, her dignity, her love, her life, and her peace. As she walked aimlessly through the night, she couldn't help but wonder how her life had come to this. She had once been so full of hope, so full of dreams, but now she was just alone, abandoned and broken beyond repair. 3 years had passed since Rita was forced out of the house, and during that time, James's new life with Emma hadn't gone as smoothly as he had imagined. The joy that once filled their home had been slowly replaced by a growing sense of anxiety and fear. The source of his dread was Michael, their beloved son, who had yet to take his first steps. At first, Emma and James tried to remain calm. They reasoned that some children take longer to develop, but as Michael's third birthday approached, he still hadn't begun to walk. Their worry turned into panic. They sought help from the best doctors in the country, each one running tests, but no one could find anything physically wrong with Michael. He appeared to be a healthy child, except for his inability to walk. James's mother, who had once been so thrilled about their grandson, became desperate. "We need to try other methods," she suggested one evening, her eyes filled with fear, her once firm and confident tone replaced by uncertainty. They turned to herbalists, hoping that traditional remedy would work where modern medicine had failed. But after months of treatment, prayers and rituals, nothing changed. The boy refused to walk. They visited pastors, asking for prayers and deliverance, but each time they left with the same heavy hearts. Every day, as James looked at Michael, a sense of dread washed over him. The boy's inability to walk was not just a mystery, It felt like a punishment. James could no longer ignore the thoughts that plagued his mind. His cruelty towards Rita, the betrayal and the abuse. His life, which he had thought was perfect, now seemed cursed. The more he looked at his son, the more he was reminded of the heartless actions that led him there. Even Emma, once so confident and proud of her place in James's life, had grown anxious and irritable. The tension between them escalated with constant argument about Michael and what they should do next. But no matter how much they tried to push away the feeling, they both knew something deeper was wrong. Something beyond what any doctor or herbalist could fix. One late afternoon, as James sat alone in his living room, the weight of the years pressing heavily on his shoulders, a letter arrived. It was delivered by hand, and in the envelope bore a name he hadn't seen in years, Rita. His heart pounded as he opened it, unsure of what to expect. The letter was short, but every word hit him like a stone. Rita had moved on, she wrote. She had found peace in her life and wanted him to know that she had forgiven him, not just for his sake, but for her own healing. As James read on, his eyes widened at her next revelation. Rita had been pregnant once during their marriage, but the baby was lost due to the stress, abuse, and torment she had endured in his house. James's hand trembled as he read her words. The realization hit him like a wave, drowning him in guilt. He had been so consumed with his desire for a child, so blinded by his mother's demands, that he had not only destroyed his marriage, but also the life of his unborn child. The child he had wanted so desperately had existed, but his own actions had caused the loss. The weight of it was unbearable. His mother's obsession with having a grandchild and his own impatience had driven him to destroy the one person who had truly loved him. In the weeks following the letter, James's guilt consumed him. He tried to reach out to Rita, desperate for a chance to apologize, to make things right, but it was too late. Rita had moved on with her life, far away from the pain that he had caused her. She didn't need his apologies anymore. She had found her own peace, far away from him. James, on the other hand, was left to face wreckage of his decision. No matter what he did, Michael still could not walk. Every prayer felt unanswered. Every attempt at healing seemed to fall flat. The weight of his past hung over him like a dark cloud, refusing to let him forget the harm he had caused. Emma, too, had grown distant. The once vibrant and joyful relationship they had shared was now filled with bitterness and resentment. She blamed James for the situation they were in, for the son who could not walk, for the growing tension in their lives. James, though filled with guilt, had no words of comfort to offer her. He was haunted by the knowledge that this was all his doing. One evening, as he sat in silence, watching Michael struggle to play with other children in the neighborhood, he realized that no matter how much he tried, he could never undo the damage he had caused. He had betrayed Rita, mistreated her, and in the end had lost more than he could ever imagine. The strain in James's and Emma's marriage had been building for years, but after Michael's condition showed no improvement, the tension exploded. Emma had grown bitter and resentful, her once loving gaze now replaced with cold, distant stares. She was tired of carrying the burden of a child who couldn't walk and a marriage that was falling apart. Each day, her frustration boiled over. "This is all your fault," she would scream at James. "You brought this curse upon us. If you hadn't betrayed Rita, none of this would have happened." James, too, was weighed down by guilt. He no longer had the energy to argue back. He knew she was right, at least in part. His betrayal of Rita had set off a chain of events that led to their current misery. But hearing these words from Emma only deepened the hole of regret he had been digging for years. One day, after another heated argument, Emma packed her things and decided she had had enough. With tears in her eyes and bitterness in her heart, she took Michael and left the house without looking back. "I am done," she said coldly. "I can't stay in this life anymore. I will take care of Michael and I will raise him on my own. Maybe being away from you will help." James watched them leave, unable to stop them. The silence that followed their departure was deafening. The once vibrant house, filled with dreams of love and a growing family, was now empty. Emma had taken their son, and with her exit, she had also taken the last piece of family James had left. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but the silence in James's home remained. His mother, who had been such a dominant force in his life, had passed away recently. James was left utterly alone, a shadow of the man he once was. The loneliness that now consumed him was the same loneliness he had forced upon Rita years ago. Ironically, the very thing he feared most, being without a family, had now become his reality. The home that had once been filled with laughter and the promise of a future was now nothing more than a cold, empty reminder of his past mistakes. He would sometimes try to call Emma, hoping to hear about Michael's progress, but her phone was always off. She had cut him off completely, just like he had cut Rita out of his life years before. Now, he was left to carry the weight of his regrets alone. Years passed, though it did little to ease James's pain, carried on as it always did. One day, while sitting at the cafe near his old neighborhood, he overheard a conversation between two women who were catching up on village news. One of them mentioned the name Rita. James's heart stopped for a moment as he strained to listen. She remarried, the woman said with a smile, and she has a beautiful baby girl now. James' chest tightened as he processed the news. Rita had remarried. She had a child. For a moment, he didn't know whether to feel joy or sorrow. The guilt he had carried for years seemed to crush him all over again. But at the same time, there was a strange sense of relief in knowing that she had found happiness after all the pain he had caused her. In that moment, James understood the full weight of his mistakes. Rita had moved on and built the life he had denied her. She had found love again and had a family, something he had once thought she would never have. Meanwhile, his own life lay in ruins, shaped by his own greed and cruelty. For the first time in years, James allowed himself to cry. He wept not just for the pain he had caused, but for the life he had destroyed, the child he had lost, and the love he had so carelessly thrown away. There was no going back now. Rita had found her peace, her happiness, but for James, the final twist of fate was clear. He would live out the rest of his life alone, haunted by the choices he had made and the family he had lost forever. The story of James and Rita teaches us that selfishness and betrayal leads to destruction, while patience and forgiveness brings peace and happiness. James's greed and impatience, influenced by his mother, results in betrayal and cruelty, causing him to lose his first wife, his second family, and his peace of mind. In contrast, Rita endures hardship but ultimately finds fulfillment by moving on and rebuilding her life. The story highlights that love, patience, and forgiveness are far more rewarding than yielding to personal desires and societal pressures. Thank you so much for watching this fantastic story on African Stories by Tiana. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing stories. See you next time.